Hi everyone, welcome to our Objective Tree Theory of Change tutorial. In this video we're going to demonstrate the steps for putting together an objective tree and a theory of change. We learned from the self-guided presentation that the objective tree tool is a complement to the problem tree, and that's how we're going to use it here. So we demonstrated the problem tree tool in a video in Module 2, and so we're going to use the same fictionalized example that we used in that video. So if you have not seen the problem tree demonstration video yet, this video probably will not make much sense to you. So make sure you watch the other video first. Remember, that's in Module 2. So moving forward, the example that we used last time, we talked about sea level rise in Ketopia. And remember that Ketopia is a small island developing state, and they're having problems with sea level rise because of global warming. And in the first video, we diagrammed the problem using the problem tree technique, and this showed us the direct and indirect drivers of the problem. That was the problem state. Now with the objective tree, what we're going to do is we're going to build on the problem tree to describe the better conditions that our project will bring about. So the objective tree is going to show us what we call the ideal state. As you can see down here at the bottom of the slide, the ideal state. So remember, the problem tree shows us the problem state, the existing baseline conditions, and then the objective tree, which we'll work on in this module, shows us the ideal conditions or the improved conditions that's the with project scenario. That's what things look like if you do the project. That's the objective tree. And then after the objective tree, we'll discuss the theory of change. And the theory of change describes how you will move from the problem tree or the problem condition to the ideal condition. So how you move from problem tree to objective tree. That's what the theory of change does. Alright, so let's look again at our tree. And remember, with the problem tree, the trunk of the tree is a core problem. We learned that in the Module 2 video. And then the roots, the big roots, are the direct causes, and the smaller roots are the indirect causes. And so we have a chain of causality here. The indirect causes lead to the direct causes, and the direct causes directly drive the core problem. Then above, in the branches here, in the big branches, we have the direct effects. These are the direct effects of the core problem, and then the indirect or downstream effects of the core problem, as you can see here. That's our problem tree. So when we look at the objective tree, we simply flip this, right? And so the trunk, remember, it was the core problem. Well, it becomes the core objective, or the sometimes called the project development objective. It becomes the solution state. This is the reality that we want our project to bring about. And then instead of the driving causes, we turn the driving causes into the direct enabling conditions. So these are the things that will allow your core objective, your ideal state, to become a reality. And then the indirect driving causes become the indirect enabling conditions. Yeah, so what we're doing here is we're just flipping the problem tree to the objective tree. We're taking the problem condition and we're imagining a better future. So up here in the top in the branches, we've got our direct effects, and then, as you might imagine, we've got our indirect effects in the branches. So that's what the objective tree analysis does. Now let's move on. Now what you see here on the screen is a reproduction of our full problem tree that we did in Module 2. Yeah. In Module 2, in the video, remember our core problem, as you can see it right here, damage to coastal communities due to sea level rise. SLR, sea level rise. And then the driving causes, the things that directly contribute to that, remember, people build in vulnerable zones. They build in areas that are vulnerable to sea level rise and to king tides and storm surges and things like that. And because of that, remember, we test our logic here. If people build in vulnerable zones, will they be susceptible to damage? Will they have damage? Will there be damage to coastal communities due to sea level rise? And the answer to that question is yes, right? There's a direct connection between these things. Structures are poorly built, damage to mangroves and coral, and all of these are the indirect causes down here, and these are the direct effects, and the indirect effects up top, yeah, in the high branches. So remember, this is from our problem tree. Now what we do with the objective tree is we're gonna change this problem state into a better future, into the preferred future. Yeah, and it's quite straightforward and simple to do that. You can see our objective tree. Remember, we moved from our problem tree. You can see up in the upper left-hand corner, we moved from the problem tree to the objective tree here. And to do that, well, let's start with our core problem, damage to coastal communities due to sea level rise, right? Let's flip the script, as you see. Let's turn our problems into objectives. Let's turn our problem state into the preferred future that we want to see. And starting with a core problem, you can see, right, look, damage to coastal communities due to sea level rise becomes coastal communities are more resilient to the effects of sea level rise. You see that we just changed the problem into a solution here. And that will become the objective of the project that we're developing. So let's move over here to people build in vulnerable zones. Well, what if we change that? People build in safe areas, or people do not build in vulnerable zones. If people build in safe areas, will coastal communities be more resilient to the effects of sea level rise? Well, sure, that's how we make that happen, right? This is the enabling condition that allows this this preferred state to come into being. Yeah. So what's next? Structures are more resilient. First, we had structures are poorly built. Structures are more resilient. And if we have structures that are more resilient, will coastal communities be more resilient to the effects of sea level rise? Yes, that's the case. Yes, it will happen. Yeah. Then let's move over here to damage to mangroves and coral, and we'll change that to healthy mangroves and coral. If we have healthy mangroves and coral, will our coastal communities be more resilient to the effects of sea level rise? And I think we can all agree that the answer to that question is yes. So you can see what we're doing. We're simply flipping these problem conditions into a better future. And those are the conditions that we're going to bring about with our project. So now down here in the indirect driving causes, no hazard maps, area has not been surveyed, lack of map making skills, etc. Well, let's flip these things around. Hazard maps are made more available. That's what happens with our project. The area is surveyed. Improved map making skills, improved survey skills, and mandate to build in safe areas. So those are all of the conditions that our project is going to bring about. Over here, poor enforcement, we've got better enforcement, adequate staff, sufficient training, funds programmed into the budget, and we're going to move over here to the enabling conditions that allow structures to be more more resilient. And look, you've got lack of skills to build better structures, lack of training. What does that become? People have the skills to build resilient structures. Why? Well, because of sufficient training. And I think that you can see how this leads to a project, right? We use a problem tree to identify what's wrong. Well, we don't have a lack of training. And because we don't have a lack of training, there's a lack of skills to build better structures. Therefore, if we have training, then we'll have skills to build resilient structures, and that will lead to structures that are more resilient, and that will lead to coastal communities that are more resilient to the effects of sea level rise. Very straightforward. So again, we're changing from the problem condition to the objective tree, the desired future, the better future condition. We're showing how this change should happen. Right, and in a little bit we'll talk about the theory of change, but the theory of this is the information that we need for our theory of change. This is why we think our project is going to work. Why our project is going to work. The project is going to work because it addresses the problems. It addresses the direct and indirect driving causes of the problem. Moving over here to healthy mangroves and coral, right? What do we change? Well, we had unsustainable fishing practices. We had unsustainable mangrove harvest for fuel and building materials. What are we going to do? We're going to have sustainable mangrove harvest for fuel and building materials and sustainable fishing practices. And this is how we're going to bring that about. So our project is probably going to have some sort of activity that makes alternative materials available or improves awareness, which leads to behavior change, and improved incentives to adopt sustainable fishing practices. And up here, we've got our direct effects. Remember, these are of the problem. We haven't changed these yet, but children cannot go to school. Well, if we bring about this change here, children will attend school regularly. There will be reduced migration. There will be less job loss, right? We've got a loss of jobs. There will be less job loss. We'll have more food production. What about high repair costs for the government? The lower repair costs for the government. All of these things are the good things that are going to result from our project, right? And you can see we've finished it up here. More money for other government services, less future income loss, good nutrition, and so forth. And the big impact of our problem was decreased quality of life, and that turns into what? Improved quality of life. So that's our problem tree turning into the objective tree. Now you can rewind this video if you want to watch that again, but the objective tree is a more straightforward task than the problem tree. The problem tree takes a lot of research to do because you have to do consultations, you have to provide evidence for everything that's in your problem tree. However, with the objective tree, you're simply changing the problem conditions into better future conditions. Now, once we have our objective tree completely finished, once we have all of the problem tree conditions converted into objective tree conditions, then we can move on to our theory of change. So what is the theory of change? Well, we discussed the theory of change in the self-guided tutorial. And the definition that we provided for theory of change, we gave you a simple definition. It's why your project is going to work. And I think you can see from what we've done with the problem tree and the objective tree, well, you're demonstrating why your project will work. It will work because you have designed, you're addressing the core problem, the direct causes of the core problem, and the indirect causes of the core problem. That's why your project will work. Right? You can explain why the core problem exists, and then you attack the direct and indirect driving causes of the core problem. So that's basically what our theory of change is. But the theory of change is used to frame how your project is going to facilitate movement from the problem state to the solution state, right? In other words, the theory of change tells us how we're going to move from problem to preferred solution, or to a better future. And so here we've got a diagram that basically lays out how the theory of change works. Yeah, the theory, you can see on the left-hand side over here, we've got our problem statement. And we'll state our core problem and explain why the problem needs to be addressed. So remember that everything that we do in our project design process is evidence-based. And so your problem tree is based on the evidence. We say this is the core problem, and we know it's a core problem because of this evidence. And then we describe the contributing factors, so explain why this is a problem. Lists the primary and secondary drivers that are causing the problem. So sea level rise or lack of resilience to sea level rise in Ketopia is a problem because structures are poorly designed, and because of mangrove and coral damage, and because people build in unsafe and vulnerable locations. Right? Those are the three problems. And then we move into the enabling factors. This is where the change comes in. So therefore, right, so let's step back a minute. The core problem that we've been dealing with is sea level rise, damage from sea level rise. Right? Communities are not resilient to sea level rise. Again, it's because coral and mangrove damage. It's because people are building in vulnerable locations, and also because their structures are substandard. Therefore, if we address coral and mangrove damage, and if we address the fact that people are building in unsafe and vulnerable locations, and if we address the fact that people are building with substandard materials, then we should see a change, right? That's our theory of change. That's my theory of change in the case of Ketopia. So we start with our problem statement, and we describe our contributing factors. And remember, therefore, if we address these contributing factors, then we should see an expected results. Describe how addressing the core problem will have a positive impact on society. So that's our theory of change, basically the theory of change. So after completing your problem tree and your objective tree, and you see here, sometimes people call it the solution tree as well. I call it the objective tree because that's what I was taught. But if you hear solution tree, that means the same thing as objective tree. So after you're completing your problem tree and your objective tree, you'll have everything you need for your theory of change. So here, let's look at it a different way. And we've got our objective tree and we've got our problem tree laid out. Remember, they're basically mirror images of one another. We did our problem tree first, and then we developed our objective tree. It's a mirror image of the problem tree. So we'll start off with our core problem, right? And that comes from your problem tree. Core problem comes from problem tree. And then our direct causes come from our problem tree as well. And then we have our indirect causes, and these come from our problem tree. So here's our core problem, and it's a core problem because of factor A, factor B, and factor C. And these things are what make factor A, factor B, and factor C problematic. And therefore, right, well, if we address these indirect causes and create indirect enabling conditions, well, that should create direct enabling conditions. And if we do that, these direct enabling conditions should bring about the core objective. Right? So you see how a theory of change works? So you're describing why we have a problem down here. And therefore, if we address the direct and indirect enabling conditions, then we should see a change. We should achieve our core objective. So that's why we call it a theory of change. Theory sounds complex, but it's basically the logic or the reasoning why we think the change will happen in the project. Remember, I always say that the theory of change is why you think your project will work, or why your project will work. And now you can see why I describe it that way. Yeah, the theory of change is simply describing why the project is going to work. Yeah, why you expect the project to work. And if we lay it out here in these steps, it makes it quite clear. Yeah. And that will give us our desired results and a big gold star from the GCF. So now let's use the sea level rise problem from Ketopia to describe the problem. Yeah. So you hear increasing. So we're creating a sample narrative here for a theory of change. Increasing global temperatures are causing sea level rise near Ketopia or in Ketopia. As a result, coastal communities are being negatively impacted. Children are missing school, and jobs are being lost, and people are being forced to leave. So you see here that we have described our core problem and also the impacts of the core problem. Why the core problem is important. Because, there are a lot of problems, and you have to justify to the GCF why your problem is so important that it needs funding from the GCF. And so that's what we're doing here. We're describing the core problem, but we're also describing the impacts of the core problem. So you can see the first part of our narrative and the second part of our narrative, right? This is occurring because people live in poorly constructed houses that are built in vulnerable areas or areas vulnerable to storm surges. Natural protective barriers such as mangroves and coral reefs have all also been degraded. So those are the driving causes that lead to the problem condition. Now remember, when we talked about the problem tree, we learned about leverage points and control knobs. These are the conditions that we can change or influence through the project. Now we don't see those yet, right? We don't see those yet in the direct causes. I mean, we understand that we need to change these conditions, but at this point we do not see the leverage points on how to change those conditions. So let's dig a little bit deeper to the indirect causes. The indirect causes: people who live in coastal communities lack the knowledge, skills, and resources to effectively address this problem. These people also do not understand climate change, or they have a lack of understanding of climate change. Aha! So these are things that we can change. So we can do a project to address these indirect driving causes. Yeah. So it stands to reason that if we give people knowledge, skills, and resources to effectively address the problem, then they'll address then they will effectively address the problem. Yeah. So let's move on to our indirect enabling conditions, and you can see we've switched over to our objective tree. And remember, we did the objective tree in the previous slides. So let's use our objective tree or our solution tree to describe the solution. And we have people in coastal communities of Ketopia will be taught how to identify suitable areas to build houses. Or we'll teach them how to, how to incorporate climate change considerations in decision-making processes. We'll do something like that, yeah. But people in so there's different ways to phrase this, but we're saying the same thing basically. People in the coastal communities of Ketopia will be taught how to identify suitable areas to build houses. They will be given the skills needed to build climate-resilient housing and taught how to sustainably manage resources. And if that happens, well, what are we going to see? We're going to see, as a result, houses will be built in areas not prone to flooding events. And structures will be built with more resilience to the effects of sea level rise, and natural protective barriers will be reestablished and maintained. And if that happens, well, coastal communities in Ketopia will be more resilient to the impacts of sea level rise. Children will not miss school, job loss will be reduced, and the government will have to pay less for repairs. That's our desired results. As a result of these changes, the people living in coastal communities of Ketopia will experience better health, they'll have more money, and their overall quality of life will improve. So you can see very clearly here that we're narrating, or we're describing a process of change, our theory of change. And because we have a good problem tree and a good objective tree, we know that our theory of change is based on evidence, right? It's a good theory of change. And so this explains very clearly to the GCF the transformation that we expect to see from the project and why we expect to see that transformation. Very straightforward. So next, wrapping up, like we said in the self-guided presentation, many people, they find theory of change, they find the concept confusing. But we're hoping that this is not the case for you anymore after the self-guided presentation and after our explanation here. The theory of change is very straightforward. It's why the project is going to work. That's the theory of change. The role of the theory of change is to describe the change that the project will bring about from the problem condition to the better future, the desired future conditions. Now, you should be able to develop your own theory of change. Yeah. So we've got the narrative description here, and this is everything that we talked about in the previous slide, linked together as a single coherent narrative. And remember, with the concept note, we're developing concept notes, and so we have to be concise and clear. It's the logic of the theory of change that is most important. When you develop your full proposal, after your concept note is approved, then you'll add more details. But here we want to focus on telling the story of the change, and that's what we've done. So that's a wrap. That's it for this demonstration video on objective tree and theory of change. In this module, we have two exercises, one for the objective tree and one for theory of change. And these exercises should guide you through, help you develop your own objective tree and your own theory of change. So thanks for your attention. We hope this has been helpful to you. Have a great day.